Ever come across like a text that feels like it's spoiling for a fight? That's kind of the vibe I'm getting from this Christ and crossbow thing we're looking at.
Yeah, it's definitely not pulling any punches.
No kidding. I mean, just a few pages in, and they're already calling people zombies and imbeciles. It's like, buckle up, Buttercup.
Definitely a wild ride so far.
Totally. But the thing that really stuck with me is this whole Jesus as a loaded crossbow bit. It's not exactly subtle, you know? What do you make of an analogy like that? It's pretty out there.
Well, it grabs your attention right away, that's for sure. And I think that's the whole point. They're trying to shake people up a bit, get them to really confront this idea of ultimate truth.
So it's kind of like a slap in the face, a wake-up call.
Yeah, exactly.
Ah,
But it also tells you a lot about how this author sees the world. The fact that they chose a weapon, and a pretty violent one at that, suggests that they see truth as this powerful force, something that's unleashed rather than just passively received.
interesting. So it's not just about being shocking, it's about setting the stage for their whole argument about truth being this aggressive, dangerous thing.
Exactly. And they keep hammering that home with this whole bit about the biblical prophecy and the male child who is to rule all nations with a rod of iron. You might think they're talking about an actual weapon, but they're not.
Okay, so if it's not a literal rod of iron, what is it? How do they interpret that?
They're saying it represents undeniable truth, something so powerful that you can't ignore it or resist it.
Yeah.
It's like that moment when the crossbow trigger is pulled, the arrow of truth is released, and you can't stop it from hitting its target.
So the arrow is this truth, and we're in its path, basically. Makes you wonder how they think people react when they're confronted with this truth.
Well, that's where this pre-recognition understanding idea comes in. They're saying there's a fundamental difference between how we understand the world before and after we recognize the true Christ. It's like this timeline where Jesus' birth is the beginning and his recognition as the Messiah is the end. But it's not a straight line between the two. It's more like a sudden realization.
So it's like the world is split in two, before you get it and after. And if you're stuck in that before stage, you're missing the point.
Exactly. And they're saying that clinging to that old way of seeing things, that pre-recognition understanding, is dangerous. It's like standing in the path of that arrow without even knowing it.
That's a pretty intense way to put it. It's like they're saying that this encounter with the real Christ will completely rock your world.
Totally. And then they take it even further by asking all these questions about belief and truth questions. Like, can belief close the door the truth opens? And then they answer it, no. But then they flip it. Can the truth close the door belief opens? And for that, they say yes.
Okay, well, hold on a second. That seems like a pretty dense concept. What are they getting at there?
It's like, imagine trying to close a door that's already been blown off its hinges, right? That's what they're saying about belief trying to squash truth. You can believe something with all your might, but if it's not true, it's not true. But truth has this power to just walk in and flip the script, completely overturn whatever you thought you believed.
So they're saying truth is even more powerful than faith.
That's definitely what they seem to be saying. And this leads to another big part of their argument. What happens if you reject this truth? Remember that whole brains splattered all over the wall thing?
Yeah, I was kind of wondering about that myself. It seems a little over the top, you know.
Well, they're not exactly known for their subtlety, are they? But I don't think it's just about shock value. They're trying to show how important this is, how high the stakes are. To them, rejecting this Christ, this truth, it's not just disagreeing, it's like totally missing the point of reality. And that, they're saying, has consequences. Like, you can ignore the truth if you want to, but don't be surprised if it bites you in the butt later.
So it's not just about being wrong, it's about facing actual consequences for being wrong.
That's it. And this ties back into that timeline analogy, too.
Yeah.
Remember, if recognizing the real Christ is this huge life-changing event, then anyone stuck in the before is basically clueless, blind to how things really are.
It's almost like they're talking about a parallel universe or something where people are stuck in the dark ages and can't see what's right in front of them.
Exactly. And for this author, it's not just some abstract idea. It actually matters in the real world. They even talk about how people reacted to Jesus back in the day, pointing out that even when they were face-to-face with what they considered truth, a lot of them still rejected it.
Which kind of brings us back to that loaded crossbow, doesn't it?
Totally. That crossbow, it's like this symbol of radical change, this potential for everything you thought you knew to be completely upended. But it also shows how much responsibility each person has. The author is saying, hey, the truth is out there waiting for you to see it, but you got to open your eyes first.
So it's not enough to just stumble across the truth. You have to actually choose to accept it.
That's the thing. And they're not sugarcoating it either. They're saying this choice, it might be hard, even painful, You might have to question everything, face all your biases, maybe even get your brains splattered all over the wall. Metaphorically speaking, of course.
Yeah, let's hope it doesn't come to that for any of us.
Yeah.
But hold on, they keep saying how powerful truth is, but they also admit that not everyone is going to accept it. How do they explain that?
They basically say that people who reject this Christ, this ultimate truth, are doing it on purpose out of ignorance. Like, it's so stuck in their own head, so attached to their old way of seeing things, that they just can't or won't accept the truth, even when it's staring them right in the face.
So they're like trapped in their own little bubbles, unable to deal with anything that challenges their worldview.
Pretty much.
Yeah.
And the author is pretty clear about what they think happens to people who think like that. They say it can really mess with your reality, make you totally out of touch.
It's wild how they connect this idea of truth being super powerful with personal choice. You'd think it would be one or the other, right? Either truth is going to bulldoze over you, or you're free to choose what you believe.
It's a tough one to wrap your head around, for sure. It shows how much this author is trying to understand these huge questions about faith, truth, and what it even means to be alive.
Speaking of big questions, this whole thing feels like one giant wrestling match with these ideas. They present this Christ figure as the ultimate truth, something you can't ignore. But then they also seem to get that people are stubborn, that we like to hold on to our beliefs even when they're challenged. So where does that leave us? What are we supposed to do with all this intense, kind of contradictory stuff?
Honestly, I think that's exactly what they want us to think about. They're not giving us easy answers here. They're trying to provoke us, make us figure out our own relationship with belief, truth, and how we understand the world.
So instead of giving us the answer, they're making us find it ourselves.
Exactly. And that's where the real value is, I think. It's not about telling us what to believe. It's about making us think for ourselves, pushing us to confront our own assumptions and biases, even if it's uncomfortable.
It's like they're saying, don't just take my word for it. Go figure it out for yourself and see what you discover.
And in a world where everyone's got an opinion and you can't trust anything you read online, being able to think critically and decide for yourself is more important than any answer someone could give you.
Well said. This Christ and crossbow thing definitely throws some curveballs. Some of it's pretty out there.
That's one way to put it.
But even if we don't agree with everything, it's given us a lot to think about.
For sure. And that's what makes for a really thought-provoking piece of writing, right? It sticks with you even after you're done, making you ask tough questions and really examine your own beliefs.
So for our listeners who might be feeling a bit overwhelmed right now, like they just took a crossbow bolt to the brain, where do we even start unpacking all of this? What's the most important thing to take away?
Well, I think it helps to remember just how intense this whole thing is. It'd be easy to get hung up on all the aggressive language and crazy images they use, but underneath it all, you can tell they're really serious about this. Like they really want us to understand what they see as this huge, life-changing truth. Yeah, that comes through loud and clear. It's like keep grabbing us and saying, hey, don't just sit there and let this wash over you. Really think about this. Argue with it if you have to. See if it holds up against what you already believe.
And that's a good exercise no matter what you believe, right? Even if you don't agree with everything they're saying about Christ or truth or whatever, just the act of asking questions and really thinking about it, that's got to be a good thing.
Absolutely. It's like working out a muscle. The more you use your critical thinking skills, the stronger they get. And those skills are useful everywhere, not just for these big philosophical debates.
So this isn't just about religion or spirituality. It's about learning how to think better in general.
Exactly. It's about being able to look at any information, even stuff you disagree with, and ask, what's the evidence here? What are they assuming? And does this actually make sense to me based on what I know about the world?
You know, it's funny you mentioned that because one thing that really struck me about this document was how much conviction they have. It's not just an intellectual argument. It's like they're really pouring their heart into it. And that kind of passion, even if it's a little over the top sometimes, it can be kind of infectious.
It's true. And that's why it's so important to approach texts like this with an open mind, but also with a critical eye.
Yeah.
Let yourself feel the weight of what they're saying, but don't be afraid to ask tough questions and challenge the parts that don't sit right with you.
So it's about finding that balance, right, between being open to new ideas and being careful about what you believe. Not just swallowing everything whole, but also not shutting down just because it makes you uncomfortable.
Exactly. It's about taking an active role in figuring out what's true, engaging with the material on your own terms, and coming to your own conclusions.
That's a great point. And, as we wrap this up, it strikes me that this whole thing with the loaded crossbow and the search for truth, it's kind of like a metaphor for our own lives, don't you think?
How so?
Well, we all have our beliefs, right? Things we hold to be true about ourselves and the world. And sometimes we come across something new, a new piece of information or a new experience that challenges those beliefs, forces us to take a second look. It can be scary, even painful, like taking a crossbow bolt to the chest. But it can also be freeing. It can lead us to a deeper understanding of ourselves and the world.
That's a really interesting way to look at it.
Yeah.
It really speaks to the power these big questions have about belief, truth, reality. These are questions people have been grappling with for centuries, and they still resonate with us today.
They really do. And while Christ and Crossbow might not give us all the answers, it definitely makes us think, challenges us to wrestle with these questions in a real and meaningful way.
Absolutely. And on that note, I think we've given our listeners plenty to ponder, maybe even inspired them to go on their own deep dive into belief, truth, and the importance of critical thinking.
Food for thought indeed. So until next time, keep those minds open, keep those questions coming, and remember, sometimes the most important truths are the ones that force us to look inward and challenge what we thought we knew.